quiet inside of us is not a trademark of a practicing alcoholic, drug addict, nut job, whatever, which I identify as all of those things at one point in my life. And I had to have quiet. That was the only way I was going to recover.
Hello and welcome to my podcast, Show Up. My name is Daryl Dittmer. As someone who built financial freedom from scratch, I understand what's possible, as there was a time when I thought I had only a life of mediocrity ahead of me. Drinking, drugs, and zero confidence plagued me. The one thing that changed my life is when I decided to do things differently and give success a chance. And I don't just mean financial success, I mean life success. I started to show up to my life and my career, and one step after another provided me the life I never thought possible. At any age, life begins to change when you start to show up. Welcome to my podcast.
Today I'm joined by Reverend Rachel Harrison, an ordained minister, spiritual teacher and coach, creator and host of the very successful Recover Your Soul podcast with over 1 million downloads worldwide. A little aside, I want to be there when I grow up someday, Rev Rachel. A human in recovery for over 8 years, and coming very soon, April of 2026, a published author. So a lot of great stuff going on, Rev Rachel, and wonderful things that you've done. So thank you for joining us, and I'm really happy to see you again and have you on today.
Daryl, I feel like you're my sober brother, and I love that we've been able to connect so many times, and your books have been so great for us, and so I'm really honored to be here and share again the blessings that come from showing up and waking up and choosing recovery. Yeah,
beautiful. And thank you for that. I really appreciate that. I feel the same way. I feel like we have that, connection, and, the recovery connection, the journey connection, doing the right thing connection, as far as we are able. And that's a beautiful thing because I don't think that, that can happen in certain instances in life, but sometimes there's just something a little more special, which is cool. And I felt it as we started speaking, as soon as, even before we hit record, just connecting again felt really cool.
Me too.
Thank you. So the first question that I love to ask, and we'll build our conversation around this question, wherever it decides to go, is, if you would, tell me about an event or a time in your life that caused you to show up for your life in a different way.
Yeah, this is going to be an interesting story, which is I got sober this past time when I was 48 years old in 2018. And I had been sober prior. I had gone to AA and been 3.5 years sober prior to that, and then had been pretty sure I wasn't the alcoholic. My husband was the alcoholic. So as soon as there was another opportunity to go back out, I went back out and found myself to be a full-blown alcoholic. And I was actually drinking myself on purpose to death. My life was so miserable. My marriage was so miserable. My life was I just felt like there was no hope for me. And my husband, who actually at that time was becoming more athletic, and he wanted to quit drinking again, not because his life was unmanageable, although I thought our life was pretty unmanageable, but he didn't see it the same way. But for me, our life was unmanageable, and he wanted to quit drinking. And there was this moment of grace where I realized that if I didn't take this moment, it was going to maybe never come again. So I went to Thailand with my mom on this trip that we had planned with each other for 3 weeks. And I titrated off of alcohol during those 3 weeks. I brought my baggies of shooters and titrated down. And the moment that I'm thinking of is actually during those 3 weeks, I had a respite from my life that was really painful and difficult. And my mom's a Buddhist. I was raised Tibetan Buddhist. And so we went and did a very Buddhist experience in Thailand. And I remembered myself. And so when I got off the airplane on February 10th of 2018, of course, I was an alcoholic. So I drank a whole bunch on the airplane because it was free alcohol because it's an international flight. And I knew it was my last drink. So of course I drank a whole bunch on the plane. But I got off the plane and I got into the car with my husband, who went directly into this very familiar, very ugly, very yucky tirade about our oldest son, who had been a continued issue in our family, and all the things he'd done wrong while I was gone. And this is the moment. This is the moment because I'm hungover. I'm tired. I've just had this pretty wild, eye-opening experience, and I sucked back into a life that I could feel didn't fit anymore. And instead of falling into the drama and falling back into the patterns, I had this moment where I looked at this situation, and it didn't have anything to do with him or my son or my mom. It had to do with me. And it had to do with this fact that I could feel in that moment that if I didn't show up, if I didn't choose myself in that moment and recognize that the only way out of this was me and my healing and my recovery and a choice and a decision to do things differently, that this was it. This was the life that I was going to choose. And it's hard to describe because I look back on it and I was so sort of disgusted with the life that had been created, that I had been living for a long time. And so we get out of the car and it's hard to remember. I don't think it was that night that I went back into the rooms of AA and meetings, but I think it was the next day that I went into the meeting. But that moment in the car, when I could see clearly what my choices were, that was the moment that I decided that I was going to choose me.
You said, I remembered myself.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I don't know, and I think I understand, but I think that's something that we don't hear often in today's world. I remembered myself, and that's just a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that because I think that's actually the foundation of what I talk a lot about in the book and also in Recover Your Soul is we're remembering our wholeness. Well, we haven't been modeled or taught our wholeness. Most of us, for most of our lives, have been modeled or taught that there's something wrong with us, to be uncomfortable in our skin, that, we have to be fixed, that we're broken. And especially in addiction, we're given messaging over and over and over that there's something wrong with us. And that being broken is part of what we're trying to soothe in drinking. We're trying to release these uncomfortable feelings of not being enough or not being valued or having it be the discomfort in life is so uncomfortable. When I was writing my memoir, which, you wrote a book, so you probably get this, that I wrote 3 times. And in the middle of it, I realized I'm not describing enough the part that remembers, the part that is so sometimes layered underneath, but that exists. And even if you're, one of the things I love in recovery is it's like, no matter how far down you've gone, there is a possibility to make another choice. It's never about the fact that like, oh, you screwed it up so bad this time, you can never come back. Every day is a new day. Every day you have an opportunity to remember. And I think that remembering is so powerful because this is very different than having what you had or making something that you aren't. It's about actually coming to the true essence of who we are inside. And for many of us, we don't even know who that is, right? Because we've been lost in addiction, or we've been lost. For me, it was so much codependency and people pleasing. So that remembering was that moment where my higher self, my soul self, my true self gave me just an opening in the door to have access to that higher part of me that absolutely remembers and is trying to remember your wholeness to bring you back to wholeness. Which, just saying, when I came up with Recover Your Soul, I didn't get what it meant when Spirit gave me those words, because it's recovering your soul. It's accessing parts that have been pushed aside or pushed down or forgotten or lost. And in that recovering, which is what I love about recovery, is you're remembering, you're bringing it all back to yourself to come back to your wholeness. So the more time goes on for me, both personally and as a spiritual coach, that aspect of the remembering and the recovering our soul essence becomes more and more and more just a beautiful truth of who we are and how we can show up for ourselves.
Beautifully said and beautifully articulated. And that's, it's so flies in the face. And you growing up with that sort of Tibetan Buddhist upbringing is fascinating to me, because I grew up with a Lutheran upbringing, which really has nothing to do with recover your soul. It has to do with, either do this stuff or you're going to hell kind of thing. And I'm not saying anything bad about religion. I support anyone who religion is helpful and useful for, and I think that's a wonderful thing. And everybody is where they are, but it's not about recovering your soul necessarily with religion. And that's one of the reasons for me why I had to shift. And it was a difficult shift for me. I had to shift into a completely different way of conceptualizing, or even, I shouldn't say conceptualizing, forgetting the conceptualizing of what they wanted me to do to earn my way to something beautiful, which is going to be.
Isn't that remembering your wholeness? I mean, I think that's the piece that's so fascinating isn't that the quintessential releasing of everyone else's dogma and everyone else's ideals and everybody else's belief systems, and actually remembering yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's carries with me every day, but no time do I feel it more and more profoundly is when I'm in silence and when I'm meditating or breathing practice. Do you find that to be true for you as well?
Absolutely. And what's really fascinating is, on that trip 8 years ago was probably the first time that I had allowed myself to be still with myself in such a long time, that the whole idea of being still with myself was really painful and difficult. And I work with people now who say, well, I don't want to be still. I don't want to meditate. I don't want to be quiet because the noises inside are still so chaotic and harmful. And so I think that at that part of giving yourself time to understand, there's a lot to release and let go, all that dogma that we just talked about, all those other people's belief systems and our core wounded belief systems. Now, 8 years later, my favorite thing in the world is time by myself, spiritual practice in the morning. Like, you want to go out and go to a movie or go hang out with friends? No, thanks. I just want to sit in meditation and be in this place that is the peace that I was wanting alcohol to give me. I used to say to myself, I can't drink enough to make myself stop feeling these feelings. But now I want to feel my feelings. The feelings have a different flavor to them, and they're not as much suffering in them. And I value every single experience, and I want to know myself better. And I love that quiet, peaceful, spiritual time that has become the essence of calibrating and starting my day.
Absolutely. And the really cool thing is it resonates through everything. It resonates through the rest of my day, resonates through the people I interact with. It resonates with how I go about everything that I do. And what a wonderful way to approach life. And I don't say that because, oh, it's cool because we do it. I say it because I am so grateful that it's available, that I can recover my soul, and I can have this quiet inside of me, because quiet inside of us is not a trademark of a practicing alcoholic, drug addict, nut job, whatever, which I identify as all of those things at one point in my life. And I had to have quiet. That was the only way I was going to recover me. I think it sounds exactly the same with you. And it's beautiful how it just seems to deepen and broaden over time.
Yeah. And, going back to the story of getting off of the airplane and going into the car, one of the things that's been so interesting, that's been such a shift in recovery, my husband stopped drinking the way that he did at the same time I did. I have had continuous sobriety. He's what he calls a dabbler. It's like he's 99% sober, but for him, having something every once in a while. But he's on this path as well, on his own journey. I think that's the thing, that when you're in a couple with somebody and you both are working in recovery, each person's recovery looks totally different. But the commitment that we made was that this chaos in which we were living was painful and suffering for both of us. So like that situation that was a normal in the car with him talking about our son and all, we would never have that kind of situation now, because of the quiet, because of the commitments that we've made to each other to not speak that way, to not be dramatic, to not be blaming, to not, one of the decisions that we made, agreements we made, was to stop talking about our adult kids, because we would fight over them. And a lot of healing came for me about letting go of control of everything in the entire world, but specifically around my adult children and my husband and his relationship with them. And that started offering more quiet. So it's like this constant meddling and judgment and chaos that ensued in trying to manipulate, manage everybody else's lives, was such a huge piece of the dysfunction in our family, who we all loved each other so much, but we were just a mess, And so part of these last 8 years that has allowed for the quiet is so much of that drama has lessened and lessened and lessened and lessened. There's still life, because life is lifey, and you gotta be embodied. We came here on purpose to be embodied. So sometimes I just want to be in that meditative space, and then I have to remind myself I came here to be on the wild ride, the full ride. Don't forget to stay on the ride. But we don't have those kinds of conversations and those kinds of discourses anymore, because we've chosen a spiritual path, and we've chosen recovery, and I've chosen sobriety, and sober body, mind, spirit, soul. sober everything. It's not just the not drinking, it's so much more. But I think that quiet that I couldn't find before needed all this stuff to be healed and released and shifted so that there's space for it.
Absolutely. It reminds me of what Joseph Campbell said when he was asked about his faith. And he said, I don't need faith, I have experience. Mm. And that was an interesting, faith in my life is gigantic. I love faith in whatever it is that's pervading all of this. And I love that about life. And that's just a beautiful thing for me. But I think it hearkened a little bit to what you were saying, Reverend Rachel, about, it takes what it takes, and it took what it took, and all of the stuff goes into the soup, right? It all goes into the soup of my life, the chaos, the harmony, the darkness, the light, the shadow, everything. And it's completely cool that it's everything. And then, like, when you talked about lifing, it's all that stuff is just, it's still here. It's still running around. It still happens. But every single day it gets more profoundly, and I don't even know what the word is, quiet.
Precious is the word that comes to me.
And it's freedom. And it's absolutely freedom to be able to experience, instead of fighting all the difficult stuff. It's like, you know what? It's part of being here.
This year, I've never had a theme for a year on the podcast. I'm in my 7th season of the podcast, which, I had no idea what I was doing when I started. I wasn't an ordained metaphysical minister yet. I was in my first couple of years of recovery. And I just was compelled to start sharing the story because there was so much huge transformation happening in my life from, the experience of the car ride, which was basically the culmination of what my life was like, to where I am now. But in that moment, I was like, I just have to start talking. So I literally started my podcast by recording voice memos on my phone and just uploading them on to the internet on a podcast platform. But I didn't know at all what it was for. And now I have so much more clarity around our journey as souls that's around really recognizing the hero's journey that we're on as souls. Anyway, back to my whole thing. So this last year, I had never thought that of a theme, but in December, I heard and I have started to channel a counsel, which I never really understood what was going on, but now I have more clarity that I actually am hearing intuitive guidance. But they gave me guidance that said this year's theme is acceptance as a path to peace. And acceptance has so many layers to it. And your model has always been, and your books are about, like, the stopping fighting, this like resistance that we have. And as my community has a lot of people from Al-Anon, a lot of recovering codependents, it's more, and people pleasers, it's more of the community that I speak to, having a husband who is an addict and children who are addicts. Acceptance sometimes we think means that you accept things that are hard on you, that you should be so clean in energy and so loving and so open that you can just tolerate whatever is. And the clarity that I've had recently is around this powerful ability to have acceptance that's beyond the you can accept it but not like it. It's actually a acceptance that recognizes that nothing is unacceptable, but you have so much more understanding about what is yours to hold and what is not. and that we're getting cleaner and clearer around what is not mine, with love behind it instead of judgment behind it or fear behind it. And the acceptance just continues to grow in me, the same as the Recover Your Soul did. I feel like that acceptance piece of whatever happened in your life happened. It had to happen the way that it happened, and if we can start seeing the benefit of every experience that we had. I had 15 years of marriage that was really hard. And if I look at that piece, I could get really sad, but I'm still in the same marriage with the same person who is an entirely different person, as am I. And so when we look at it, we're like, man, that was a mountain we had to climb to get to where we are today in our marriage, and to accept what it was, and to accept the human being that he is, has given me more space to accept myself and to accept what is here, and to not be fighting it, and to step up and be continually every day saying, same as in the car, what am I going to do today to step up and be my most healed, authentic, awakened, kind, conscientious, self-empowered, loving self? Because that's the only thing I have control of anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I what came to mind was when I was first started in the 12 steps, and there was a little blue book called Acceptance. Mm. And it was, laying around at all the meetings and the racks and everything. I opened it up, and there was this line that I just loved because it spoke to the core of my being. But it was, pain is the only instrument sharp enough to prune away the excesses of our wayward will and shape it into some reasonable facsimile of God's will for us. Which I believe speaks to everything we've been talking about, but also the fact that recovering our soul is getting back to that, shaping it into some reasonable facsimile of God's will for us, because that's who we are and that's what we are.
Well, and I'd like to take it another step further, which is that, Bill and the founders of AA were inspired by New Thought, by metaphysics. It was at a time when we were moving away from that construct that you talked about by being raised Lutheran. And so I remember the first time I got sober, I didn't like the third step prayer. I didn't want to offer myself to your will, because to me, that was the Christianity. And again, I'm just like you. When people come to me for spiritual counseling, I want you to have the power of your understanding. I want you to connect to the God of your wholeness. I'm never trying to tell anybody what that is. I think it's a unique relationship in all of us. But I think that there has been a lot of religions that have been harmful to people, that they feel like the will of God is to be subservient, to be small, to be less than. And that is not at all what I think. The more that I've gone into this metaphysics and into the world in which I live, it is more and more clear to me that a facsimile, a small essence of, what it's basically saying is, if you could just allow yourself to step just a tiny bit into the grandeur in which Spirit is inviting you to be, that this incredible gift of life that you have is not to come here and be small and afraid. That's not at all why Spirit brought us all here. Right. So to, an implement sharp enough to prune away our bondage of self, yes, so that we can stand in our light. And then when you start to open up, I think that especially when you choose your own path, take what you need and leave the rest, is such a foundational piece of what they say in Al-Anon. It's something I say too, and then you start hearing it everywhere. It's like, listen to the parts that speak to you, that resonate with you, where you feel connected, where you feel loving, where you feel whole. And those are the parts that I think we're supposed to move towards, because those are the parts that allow us to shine our light. So then you start looking at almost all traditional scriptures, and you take out all the part that the people wrote after and all the, and you just read the message, and it is beautiful. It's about being the fullness of who you are here to be. So the will of God to me now is not to be subservient. It is to be completely freed of all of the bondage so that we can shine brightly. And now the third step prayer to me is one of my favorite prayers, because if you read it through, it's you're coming willingly, you're building together to be your most beautiful, expanded self. Relieve me of the bondage of self, take away all those wounds and all those hurts so I can be my full expression of self, and take away my difficulties. That whole idea that life is hard and crappy and we can't make it. It's like, step up, be your full self, so that others can see, like, oh, they walk through all kinds of difficult things. Look at all the things that happen in their life, in their lifey life. And their hearts are open. I want that. What are you guys doing? Well, first of all, we quit drinking. That's what we quit drinking doing. We got sober. And then there's just this opening for us to remember our wholeness and to live from that, which doesn't mean that it won't still have challenge, but it's through challenge that we learn and grow. And I just am more and more exuberant about life and being sober and being spiritually fit and being curious and choosing happiness and well-being every day.
Beautifully said, Reverend Rachel. I'm reminded when I first got into recovery and I first was introduced to the 12 steps, and my sponsor, he handed me the 10 Commandments by Emmett Fox. And that was, Emmett Fox was one of the first, sort of before the big book even came out, they were handing out, I think it was Sermon on the Mount, to people coming into the program. And the other thing I think was really cool is because when I look at the Bible now, and I think the Bible is one of the most wonderful books ever compiled, but my sponsor told me this, and I was like, and he was his sponsor was one of the first people in the program, so they kind of got it from the bottom, like from when it was first starting. And he said, Alcoholics Anonymous wasn't about not saying your last name. It was derived from a verse in the Bible saying, do your good works in secret so that your Father in heaven can reward you openly. And I was like, wow, man, that's really freaking cool. Because, like, it's just not common knowledge. And I think that's a beautiful thing that we can carry into the rest of our lives and do the best we can to. My number one priority is what I have to do for me so that I can be a light for other people.
Absolutely. And I think the in secret is not because it's something to be secretive of. It's the stepping away from the ego self that says, look at me, look at me, look at me, versus, like, oh, this work is for me, like I'm here to do this for me. And if I can do this for me, then I can share it with you. And I think that is such an essential piece of humility, but not that humility that's trying to keep us small and afraid, but humility that is reminding us that the bondage of self comes in many forms.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I love that about doing your works in secret, because that's absolutely the intent. I believe it's I don't need to be seen, and I can smile at the person checking me out at the grocery store and hope that person has a great day. I can strike up the conversation with somebody at the gas station and hope that person has a great day, because I've been fortunate to be able to open up to this world where before I was closed and I was gone and I wasn't able to expand.
Yeah.
We're coming up to the end. I swear we could just keep talking.
I know we could talk forever. And that's what, what I love about all of this is we're there's safety in us being who we are. And I think that's one of the things that when people are afraid to step into recovery, or they're dancing with those parts of themselves. Maybe the remembering is not coming naturally. It's about giving ourselves grace and recognizing that everybody's on their own unique path and journey. And the more we love ourselves, the more we're gentle to ourselves, the more we have compassion for ourselves, the easier it gets to be willing to let go of the demon that keeps us in the darkness. And so I think that being in conversations with people, either in the rooms or in podcasts or, out in the world, where you can really authentically come from your heart, I think there's more and more openings for that. And I continue to have gratitude for 12-Step because I think it was the first large-scale organization that invited people to be vulnerable. And I think it was a beginning of what is now the Great Awakening, where we are willing to speak in terms about ourselves that were shameful, and it's no longer shameful. And I think a lot of that started in the rooms of AA.
I agree. And I am so very grateful. You touched on it earlier, but we come from where we come from. We went through what we went through, and that's completely cool. Like I am 1000% grateful for where I came from. I do not diminish that fact at all. I'm thank God I went through what I went through, because I may not have wanted to show up for my life in the ways that I have had I not gone through those things. And absolutely crucial to
pain is a sharp instrument, right?
Yeah, pruning me away.
Right. Well, thank you for letting me come on and share about Recover Your Soul. And you can find everything at recoveryoursoul.net. And my book comes out here in April of 2026. And I'm just here to be of service in the world. And I'm grateful that we have our communities.
Thank you. That was my next thing, is where do we find you? But we got it. Yeah, that's wonderful. I'm gonna nab that book. So I'm excited to read your book. I think that'll be wonderful. And I know it just comes from such a depth of experience, and I would challenge anyone to find, someone who speaks from that place so wonderfully. And I thank you for that. It's wonderful to hear you again and see you again.
Thanks, Daryl. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on the Show Up podcast. To learn more about me, my coaching, or my books, please feel free to visit my website, daryldittmer.com. DarylDittmer.com. Thank you.